all know that Magnus Carlsen is a pretty good chess player, but what happens when you pair him up against another really good chess player? In this video, I'm going to show you a game from 2015 played between Magnus Carlsen and former world champion Vladimir Kramnik. Let's hop into it. Magnus is playing with the white pieces this game. We have a Roy Lopez here, a Spanish, with knight f6 inviting the Berlin. Magnus chooses not to go for the endgame, instead plays d3 here, creating a nice pawn chain rather than castles and going for this line here. So d3, bishop out to c5, and this is all generic opening theory, right? It's all been played before. We have c3, d3, Magnus is going to push d4 at some point, and, you know, they're going to develop their pieces and play a game of chess. Shocker, right? So we have d4. This is, Black's knight went back to e7, and Magnus thought, that seems a bit passive. Let's play d4, kicking the bishop back, and then dropping his bishop back to defend the e4 pawn, which the knight was attacking. So we have d5, and the center explodes. When you see a pawn cube in the center like this, it's like chucking a grenade into the center of the board. It just explodes. We have knight developing first, and then we have a trade in the center, another trade, and another trade. Except here, Magnus, instead of recapturing the pawn right away and going for this isolated queen's pawn position, chooses to play queen c2. Queen c2 first, lining up a battery on the h7 pawn. Kramnik is now forced to play h6, and then we have a4. Magnus launching his pawns over on the queen side, looking to play a5 and trap the bishop with something like, nothing, a5, and, the bishop gets booted around. This is very unpleasant. So, Kramnik plays c6, creating a little getaway for his bishop, also securing the d5 square in the future. We have rook to d1, pinning the pawn to the queen, and now, this is no longer possible because you would lose your queen. So Magnus is going to win this pawn back in just a moment. We have knight takes d4, and Black develops his rook over to e8. But notice the light-squared bishop and this rook have not developed, so Magnus decides to play a5. If you'd like me to analyze one of your games, then leave a link to one of your games down in the comments, and I'll make an entire video about it. Alright, back to the Magnus game, shall we? a5, taking advantage of the fact that he has better piece development and coordination. He's got a very nice knight in the center, his bishop and queen teamed up, lining over at the king side, and the rook is x-raying the queen. This dark squared bishop could sacrifice at some moment. The rook is now about to get an open file here, so he sacrifices the pawn, drops his knight back, inviting b5. Come on, Kramnik, what are you going to do? b5? Well, look at this c6 pawn. Looking pretty weak, ain't it? So Magnus plays knight back to d4, targeting the c6 pawn. And Kramnik says, okay, I don't want to hang on to that. I'm going to play bishop back and try to go for some queen d6 and try and checkmate Magnus. So Magnus takes the pawn on c6, which could be a bit dangerous. Because look at this. The knight has galloped into Kramnik's position, but all of a sudden, queen h2 is a threat. So Magnus has to play g3, but bishop b7. And all of a sudden, after bishop f4 and queen takes c6, this looks scary. Now, the engine is not convinced, and I'm sure Magnus had everything under control, but to me, I'd be worried about getting checkmated in a few moves. I mean, look at this. The bishop's staring over here, the queen, the bishop, the knight is in the center, the rook. I mean, all of a sudden, there are more threats on White's king than on Black's. This turned around very quickly. So we have bishop takes d5, and tactics start flying. Bishop takes d5. Now, you would think you have to move the queen out of the way and go for some exchanges, but no. Kramnik plays rook e1 check, sacrificing the exchange because now mate is threatened. And the only way to defend against it is actually to give back the exchange. Play queen e4 and give it back. And after all of this happens, all of these trades, this would just be a draw. We have opposite colored bishops and, 2, 2, 3, 3, materials equal, we got rooks and opposite colored bishops. Players are going to shake hands and go out for drinks. But instead, Magnus plays king h2. And he says, okay, Kramnik, you played a little fancy move here with rook e1. But what are you going to do about it? Well, Kramnik says, I'm going to sacrifice my freaking queen. He's going to sacrifice his queen. Queen takes d5, rook d5. Now, Kramnik does get the rook on a1. Magnus goes back and trades off the rooks. So what do we have? Well, a couple moves later, the rook comes out, kicks the queen over to e2. Magnus, let's say we cancel these dark squared bishops out. Magnus has a queen for a bishop and a rook. So he is up 1 point of material. You know, it's not too much of an imbalance in terms of points of material, but there are a lot of weaknesses in the black position, a very open board, and the king could be very weak. It's going to be tough to coordinate all of the pieces in black's position. The queen is just going to shred it apart, especially after trading off one of the bishops. So now Kramnik doesn't even have the bishop pair to his advantage. It's just bishop rook versus queen. So Kramnik is trying to hold his position together. He drops the rook down to d1. Magnus plays g4, creating more space for his king, and just taking away more light squares from the light squared bishop in general. So we have, the bishop moving to c6, defending the b5 pawn, but Magnus wins a7. Magnus wins a7. And all of a sudden, Magnus is up material. I mean, he was, but he's up more material now. And here's the thing. The bishop is pressured, and the rook has to stay guarding it. That's the downside of black's position, is he doesn't have enough pieces to coordinate everything together. The rook cannot take any free pawns, right, here on b2 because he would lose the bishop. So he has to stay tied to that the light squared bishop on d7. Magnus marching his king up into the black position. No fear here. Well, he drops back for a second to kick the rook out of his position and then launches f4. The pawns are rolling, and Magnus will eventually win this b5 pawn. We see a few moves later. Kramnik tries to play b4, but Magnus just takes the pawn. And sure, he gives back b2, but now he's got a pass pawn on the b file. Not only that, look at his king! His king on f6 marched all the way into the black position and is now going to help the queen in checkmating the king. This is ridiculous. Look at this. A few moves later, and we have f5. f5. And it's mate. It's just mate. Takes, queen g3. Hitting the rook. So you gotta move the rook out of the way. And after g5, Kramnik resigned. Well, why did he resign? Well, the players saw that it was mate in 4. Where's the mate? Well, if you take the pawn, then just queen takes g5, and mate on g7 is threatened, so you have to give up the rook. And then, king h6, just check here and mate. The mate in 4 is instead to play f4 to hit the queen. And then, look at this. Queen h4. Excuse me. Hold on, let's go back. g5 and f4. Queen h4. h5. Queen h5. King g8. Queen h6. And you can't stop queen g7. There was another crazy line here I looked. It's not mate in 4, it's mate in 5 with this line, but it's some crazy queen geometry bouncing all the way around the board. Look at this. If you play queen d3 check, right? Then the bishop has to block, and you just take the bishop, the king runs, and queen c8 check, and then you run the queen over to f8, and you can't stop queen g7. Ridiculous geometry of the queen here, just overpowering the rook entirely. So, Magnus wins his game against Kramnik. Thank you so much for making it to the end of this video. I really do appreciate it. And if you want to support this channel even more, make sure you hit that like button so this video can get pushed to more people, and hit subscribe as well so you don't miss a future one. And if you want to see the final round of the Bullet Chess Championship where Hikaru crushed Magnus Carlsen, then make sure you check out this video, and have a great day, guys.